Alright, it's time for a little bit more difficult stuff. Now, in the beginning of this course and in the past few lectures, we focused mostly on demonstrating how different attacks work that black hat hackers perform, and we also talked a little bit about hackers themselves and vulnerabilities. Now, in this section specifically, not everyone will be able to follow since it does require some additional knowledge of programming and knowledge of what stack is and how it's used. But don't worry, I will leave some resources that you can take a look at and learn more about this stuff if you're interested. Okay, so what is this all about? Well, before in previous lectures, we mentioned something called zero-day vulnerabilities. And now we can take a look at how these vulnerabilities can be discovered. Of course, we will be looking at a simple example with simple code so everyone can follow, but you will still need some programming knowledge in order to understand what we are doing. We're going to look at one of the most common vulnerabilities that occur in code, which are buffer overflows. Buffer overflow is, in a simple words, a vulnerability where user input is required and stored in a limited size variable without the check whether the user input fits that size. If the code doesn't check if user provided an input that is within the variable size limit, then we have buffer overflow vulnerability, since I, as someone who controls the user input in that program, can submit input that is larger than the specified buffer. Now, this might sound confusing right now, but it will all be clear in an example that we will do. And don't worry if you don't really get everything that we say, since this is really out of the aspect for this specific course, but we will, however, show it just because zero-day vulnerabilities and exploit development are usually taboo topics in this field. We just want to show a simple example of this and how this works. Nonetheless, here are some resources that you can read if you want to get more into exploit development and discovering vulnerabilities with buffer overflow. So once again, before I share these resources, you will need two different things. You will need a little bit of a programming knowledge, and you will need a little bit of assembly knowledge. Knowledge of stack is also quite important, but you will probably understand it along the way. Okay, so right here I have a Rapid7 website, and this article right here pretty much just dives deep into buffer overflows. It explains how they work, what they do, and when they occur. It gives simple code examples, and most of the code will be written in C because that's where most of the buffer overflows will be discovered. And it gives a step-by-step guide into exploiting the buffer overflow for this specific code. Now, once again, if you don't know how to code, don't worry, just sit back and try to understand the main idea behind buffer overflows, but if you don't, it's all good, this will come with time. Second thing that we have is another website called Triaxiom Security, and it also explains what buffer overflows are. It does also have nice pictures, so here we have a stack image. You will also encounter a lot of times these things right here, such as ESP, EBP, and EIP. We will also see it in the next lecture where we demonstrate the buffer overflow. These are important to understand, EIP or RIP being the instruction pointers and EBP being the base pointer. If you don't know what these are, make sure you read about these two before you get into the next lecture, because we will be using it and abusing it. Okay? So the next thing that we have is packedpub.com, and this is a paid source, but it does show a cool image right here where it shows how a stack buffer overflow looks like. So there is a certain variable that is vulnerable to the buffer overflow. If we overflow it with A's, the saved EBP and the saved EIP are also going to be overflowed with bunch of A's. This way we simply control the EIP, and if we control the EIP, we also control the next code to be executed. Here are also some of the resources. So Secure Coding has an article on how to protect against buffer overflows. And if you don't know assembly language, I do recommend reading this book if you're interested in this stuff. If you're not interested, feel free to skip it, but if you want to learn exploit development, you will need knowledge of assembly, and then you can check out this book, which is decent for beginners. And last but not least, I want to show you this YouTube playlist of MIT course on computer systems security. Now, this is not really connected to the buffer overflows, even though they are covered in this playlist, but it's a really good playlist, MIT lectures devoted to computer security. It does take some prior knowledge, so I do advise on finishing this course first before diving deep into this playlist right here. Okay, nonetheless, this was just an introduction. I will leave all of these resources below in an article so you can check them out. And right now, let's get straight into showing an example of buffer overflow in a simple C code.